Picard Shidethan Toela Drell. This is Tamarian, or Sokath Esibura Avaba, the language of 1 million translators' notes. Tamarian is an alien language spoken by the Tamarians, or Children of Tama, which originate from Sigma Tama 4. The language's first appearance was in Season 5, Episode 2 of Star Trek The Next Generation. In the episode, the crew of the Enterprise D struggled to communicate with a Tamarian diplomatic envoy despite possessing absurd universal translator technology, which can psychically glean intended meaning from a speaker's brainwaves and convert that into language the user understands. And while Universal Translator is capable of translating Tamarian speech into Federation Standard, it comes across as strings of proper names of individuals and locations. For those curious, I highly recommend Astrid Lunberg's video essay on the episode. It resurfaced in 2021 with the appearance of a Tamarian lieutenant named Kaishon in Star Trek Lower Decks. While the language is the main focus of the episode, Tamarian has not yet, to my knowledge, been fleshed out into a fully formed conlang. As such, I have taken it upon myself to correct this. To remove ambiguity between lore established in my personal realization of Tamarian and established canon, all canon statements will be written in purple and marked with a dagger. The consonants are ma, na, pa, ba, ta, da, ka, ga, fa, va, sa, za, sha, ja, tha, cha, ra, and la. The vowels are i, u, e, o, a, and I. There are 4 tonemes in Tamarian: stress, rising tone, falling tone, and vibrato. Stress in Tamarian is characterized by increased loudness and vowel length, as well as full articulation of the vowel. Rising and falling tones are used for defective single-syllable nouns, where stress is not sufficient to divide the noun into distinguishable inflections. It is easier to tell whether your friend Rapunki said rai or rai than whether he said rai or rai. Vibrato functions the same as it does in singing and public speaking, and will be represented here with vibrato's musical notation. As the grammatical information which these tonemes convey is often inferable from context, they are frequently dropped in Tamarian's conversational mode. Orthography. Okay, hear me out. There was very little to go off of other than a few scribbles glimpsed over Picard's shoulder and on one computer screen. Scribbles which were probably not meant to be viewed with too much resolution, so I did my best to interpret what was there. Besides, writing systems in Star Trek are already kind of a hot mess. The inspirations for the Tamarian alphabet are cursive, musical notation, and paper transcription of Ogham. Letters are drawn on top of a guideline. Each letter starts and ends on the guideline and are written without lifting the writing implement. The Tamarian alphabet is arranged by its speakers in a 6x6 grid. The vowels appear in 3 rows at the end in unstressed, stressed, and vibrato-stressed cases. As previously mentioned, the grammatical information which Tamarian tonemes convey is often inferable from context, meaning denoting them in writing is not strictly necessary for knowing where and how to pronounce them, and pronouncing them is not strictly necessary for understanding meaning. As such, the stressed and vibrato-stressed cases of vowels are often treated more like illuminated letters than in a proper uppercase. This justifies their complexity, necessitation of precise handwriting, and tendency to physically overlap with other letters on the writing medium. A stressed case vowel casts its entire syllable as stressed. A vibrato stressed case vowel casts its entire syllable as stressed, assuming the word it appears in is a non-defective role noun, and its entire word as spoken with vibrato. Tamarian sentences mostly consist of nouns and adjectives. There are no verbs in Tamarian. While adjectives are sometimes used more like participles, they rarely describe an action that the sentence actually conveys. This is because the plot twist of Darmok is that the language conveys complex ideas through metaphor and reference to mythology. It is metonymy taken to an extreme. In Tamarian, you would not call something a weakness. You would call it the equivalent of a kryptonite or Achilles' heel in Tamarian mythology. For example, unfurled in Mirab his sails unfurled is only meant to convey unfurling insofar as it evokes a scene in a story where Mirab sails away from a location. The phrase mirab his sails unfurled pragmatically conveys the action of leaving, possibly in combination with any circumstances or connotations present in that scene, such as leaving because your task has proven futile, or perhaps leaving because of overwhelming risk. Not that anyone would know, most Tamarian idioms are not explained in canon. The Tamarian ego structure does not allow for the concept of self-identity. While it is obvious from the behavior of Tamarian characters in the show that they have a concept of the self, Tamarians see themselves as perpetual actors, which, at any moment, may inhabit the roles of any number of characters whenever they feel the situation resembles one from the story those characters appear in. Side note, despite being the centerpiece and title of the Tamarian's debut episode, Darmok and Jalada Tanagra is actually a lone story, given that the episode states that Darmok is a mytho-historical figure from Shantil 3, and Tanagra is an island continent also from Shantil 3. This information was provided by the Enterprise D's computer, despite the fact that the Federation had not cracked the Tamarian language by this point. The fact that the language is conveyed through metonymy raises a number of questions about how the language is taught and how it came to exist. If the vocabulary of the language is stories, how do you build a Tamarian child's vocabulary if the simplest sentences require knowing an entire story? If the language mostly consists of references to mytho-historical accounts, what were those accounts written in? We can resolve the first question by proposing that Tamarian children are taught narrative vocabulary through nonverbal storytelling methods like picture books, puppet shows, and traditional performance art. We may also assume that younger children use more personalized narrative vocabulary, with references to situations which the child and parent both personally experienced. This is similar to how younger human children use baby speak words, which only exist in the microdialect used between them and their parents. Additionally, we can assume that in much the same way infant neuroplasticity allows human babies to pick up the partial meanings of words without understanding their full meanings, it may also allow Tamarian babies to pick up the meanings of references even if they are not familiar with the stories those references originate from. As for the second question regarding what Tamarian mythology was originally written in, I propose a turtles all the way down solution. Modern Tamarian is communicated with references to a body of mythology, which was originally written in what is called the mytho-historical age. The mythology is written in many different dialects of an earlier version of the language called mytho-historical Tamarian. These dialects varied little in grammar and verbal vocabulary, but varied drastically in narrative vocabulary. That is, the stories they utilized to convey complex ideas. A single dialect of mytho-historical Tamarian is communicated with references to the speaker's local folklore, which was passed on in oral tradition dating back to the folkloric age. It is believed by Tamarian archaeolinguists that the dialects of folkloric Tamarian spoken at the time used references to anecdotes about members of the speaker's family or tribe. As time passed and Tamarian linguistics groups came in contact with one another, their narrative vocabularies merged until they became the shared body of narrative vocabulary used in modern Tamarian. Note that the mytho-historical in mytho-historical age and mytho-historical Tamarian dialects refers to the kind of stories which originate from that time and incarnation of the language, not to the kind of stories which make up the narrative vocabulary of said language, family, and corresponding age. The same is true of the word folkloric in folkloric age and folkloric Tamarian. In the same way that older human texts can be republished with more modern language that was conceived after the text's original publication, so too can Tamarian texts be republished with references to stories which were created after the original story's creation. The closest analog Tamarian has to sentences are called images. Nouns in an image which correspond to actors in the speaker's present situation, are called roles. For example, if I were Lily Sloan accusing Jean-Luc Picard of dragging his crew into his obsessive, self-destructive, trauma-fueled pursuit of the Borg, but I wanted to do it Tamarian style by comparing the situation to Moby Dick, I would say something which literally translates to Ahab, his white whale in sight. In this image, Ahab and white whale are roles which are inhabited by Picard and the Borg respectively. The first noun in an image is almost always the primary role. The primary role can be the character whose actions the speaker wishes to focus on, or a location which, combined with other details provided in the image, paint a scenario which the speaker wishes to cast over the current situation. It is usually in the nominative case, though occasionally it is in the temporal case. All Tamarian images start with the primary role noun unless they elaborate on a previous image, in which case the primary role is implied to be the same as the one in the prior image. For example, if I wanted to accuse someone of overambition by saying Icarus, his wings brilliant in the sun, and wanted to elaborate that my warning seemed to fall on deaf ears by saying his father in hysterics, the primary role of the second image is implied to be Icarus without the need to repeat it. Images, and those images which elaborate upon them, are separated by brief pauses. Common images are often abbreviated to just their primary role, such as Darmak and Jalatab, shortened to Darmok, Murab, his sails unfurled, being shortened to Murab, and the river Timark in winter being shortened to just Timark. The primary role exists to reflect that every canon piece of Tamarian dialogue starts with a character or proper noun, and then elaborates on the specific scene with that character or proper noun, which applies to the situation. Nouns in Tamarian have 6 cases: nominative, locative, temporal, associative, extensive, and ergative genitive. Cases are formed by the prefixes to, ospa, shi, esi, and pe, with the nominative taking no prefix. Nominative case is used exclusively for primary roles. The locative, temporal, and associative cases function as you would expect. The extensive case acts similarly to a possessed case, shifting focus from a primary role to a noun which exists in relation to it. It exists so the primary role can go first in the image, while the parts of the image which come after the extensive case noun point to it and not the primary role it exists in relation to. Many, many pieces of Tamarian dialogue take the form of Temba, his arms wide, Sokoth, his eyes open, Uzani, his armies at Lashmir, etc., etc. The extensive case was created to reflect that. The ergative genitive case mostly uses its genitive functionality, unless the noun before it has adjectives attached, in which case the ergative genitive noun justifies why those adjectives are attached to the noun before it. The ergative functionality of this case more or less only exists because one time Lieutenant Kaishon said, "Gramble, his throat slit by his mistress." All other instances of Tamarian dialogue which contain verbs, participles, or other words formed from verbs do not come with an agent. That is to say, no other piece of dialogue has a noun that is verbed, be verbed by another noun. These 6 cases plus adjectives can be used to gloss every single piece of canon Tamarian dialogue with minimal change to word order. I would know because I did just that. Tamarian numerals are base 6 with digits fa, se, vai, pi, ro, and ju. And why, yes, those are the first 6 consonants combined with the 6 vowels. Thank you for noticing. Number words are strung together from most significant digit to least significant digit Tongan style. There are 5 forms of numerals in Tamarian: the adjectival forms, cardinal and ordinal, and the noun forms, which are the mathematical, representing numbers as abstract concepts, pronominal, as in Rapunki when he joined the 7, and nominal, because I wanted to give the Tamarians a way to say 7 of 9's name. Each form of numeral is formed using these suffixes, the cardinal taking no suffix. Often, the base forms of number words are abbreviated to just the consonants. Number words abbreviated in this way are marked with the numeral punctuation mark between the base form and any suffixes. Until now, I have described Tamarian grammar as it relates to words in an image. However, Tamarian also possesses grammar which relates roles and actors, as well as roles and other roles between images. Tamarian nouns each have 3 forms indicated by stress pattern. Where stress falls in each form is specific to the noun. Defective single-syllable nouns forms are distinguished by rising and falling tones, as previously mentioned, though which tone applies to which form is also specific to the noun. Rising and falling tones may be written with the rising and falling tone punctuation marks placed after the word, though much like special cases of vowels, they are not strictly necessary. When taking a loan word or proper noun from another language, the first stress pattern is generally the way that stress normally falls on the noun in its native tongue. The second stress pattern is some arbitrary other stress pattern. The first stress pattern of a single-syllable nouns from foreign languages are given whichever tone the Tamarians think they hear when they first learn it. Noun forms of numerals have their stress patterns fall on their suffixes. In conversational Tamarian, tonemes help indicate which actors inhabit which roles in an image. When in use, tonemes are applied to all roles in the image. All other words are pronounced without stress or vibrato. Instead of using a person and number system, the roles are given tonemes based on a occlusivity system. If the actor or collective of actors inhabiting a role includes the speaker, the role noun is given vibrato. Otherwise, the role noun is without vibrato. If the actor slash collective of actors inhabiting a role includes the speaker, the role noun is given. If the actor or collective of actors inhabiting a role includes individuals out of earshot, the role noun takes its second stress pattern. Otherwise, it takes its first stress pattern. This gives the listener a better idea of who in a situation is inhabiting what role if it is difficult to infer from context. The second stress pattern is sometimes used sarcastically when the speaker is fed up with a particularly stubborn audience. It implies that the listener is so bad at understanding what the speaker is saying that they must be out of earshot. The stress pattern system also solves problems with certain actors forgetting the pronunciation guide from the script and using multiple different stress patterns for the same proper nouns. We've created a system for representing present circumstances to imagery from stories. However, we still have no tools for describing people and events unrelated to the current situation. This is problematic for a language whose vocabulary is mostly made of stories. If you can't tell a story, how are you supposed to speak a language communicated almost exclusively in stories? For this reason, Tamarian has two modes. I have described the conversational mode thus far. However, when telling stories, Tamarian switched to storytelling mode. Storytelling mode necessitates the usage of the final part of speech in Tamarian, the relator. Relators describe the relationship between the scene in one image and the scene in another. There are four relators in Tamarian: the standard metaphorical relator, the hyperbolic relator for rhetorical exaggeration, the meiotic relator for tactful understatement, and the sarcastic relator for sarcastic comparison. In storytelling mode, images are grouped together. First, a head image, which describes the characters and situation in the story being told, and then one or more tail images, images from other stories which are anteceded by relators. The roles from the tail images are inhabited by characters described in the head image. Thus, the first image in the chain provides characters, setting, and elements from the story being told. And the following images in the chain compare those characters, settings, and elements to those in other stories the listener is expected to be familiar with. Pauses are used in between chains in the same way a natural language speaker might pause between paragraph breaks. Stress patterns are repurposed to create agreement between nouns in the story being told and the roles those nouns inhabit in stories being used as a comparison. Vibrato changes function in storytelling mode to indicate which parts of a post-relator images in the chain are metaphorical, hyperbolic, meiotic, or sarcastic. For example, the sentence Anzanto vinda, hogai kopechesithanagas melo is different from Anzanto vina, hogai kopechesithanagas melo, both of which are different from Anzanto vina, hogai kopechesithanagas melo. There are two pronouns in Tamarian: the speaker pronoun, eka, which is effectively the first person singular and only appears in head images in storytelling mode, and the primary role pronoun, vok. Vok always points to the primary role in the image it appears in, and as such does not take any tonemes. I would like to take this final section of the presentation before the translations to go into the specifics of how grammar evolved from mytho-historical Tamarian to modern Tamarian, as well as a reconstruction of folkloric Tamarian. The temporal case is absent in mytho-historical Tamarian, favoring usage of the locative case, or in rare cases of more precise and ornate language, the phrase totusupa. It is understood that totusupa was rebracketed into the early temporal case prefix otsupa, which was further simplified into ospa. It is around this time that scholars note a change in the ergative genitive prefix from pa to pe to distinguish it from ospa. In surviving mytho-historical Tamarian texts, the meiotic and sarcastic relators are also absent, with modern Tamarian scholars believing understatement and sarcasm to have been distinguished by context and affect, while still following under the metaphorical relator unzi. Unearthed sealed parchment on which mytho-historical Tamarian calligraphers practiced the alphabet conspicuously substitute the row for vibrato stressed case with ideograms representing common trade items. The row for stressed case is still present. This has led Tamarian historical linguists to believe that vibrato was absent in mytho-historical Tamarian. The oldest mytho-historical texts, particularly those deemed to be likely transcriptions of oral storytelling, prefer the usage of the associative case over the extensive case. Tamarian linguists theorize that the extensive case did not exist in folkloric Tamarian, with its function fulfilled by the associative. The theory suggests that the extensive case prefix "esi" is derived from "os she." The hyperbolic relator only begins to appear in writing at the beginning of the Middle Mytho-historical age, suggesting that only the metaphorical relator was present in folkloric Tamarian. Furthermore, there is the Birigiliganma, a book from the mytho-historical age Gitag Empire. The Birigiliganma catalogs orphaned images, images whose meanings were known, but whose stories were unknown or lost to time. Recorded in it is the image Boza, his binding severed when Kotok died. What was not known to the Gitagites, however, was that the image originated from the Zigash dynasty, where its associated story and where its associated story continued to survive. Modern Tamarian archaeologists studying Zigashic texts discovered that Boza and Kotok were two separate images from two separate stories. The Epic of Boza is, in fact, set nowhere near Lake Kotok. The archaeologists believe that the version in the Birigiliganma entered the Gitagite dialect in the folkloric age when the empire still had contact with Zigashic traders. Tamarian archaeolinguists speculate that for the two images to have been misheard as one, it must have been possible or even common in folkloric Tamarian to replace Unzi, at the time its only relator, with the pause. Several other orphaned images in the Birigiliganma corroborate this. Another quality of the earliest surviving Tamarian texts is that head images and tail images tend to match phrase structure more closely the older the text is. The order of roles in the head image also tends to match the order of corresponding roles in the tail images as well. Historical linguists speculate that this is because the beginning of the mytho-historical age was marked by the introduction of the two-stress pattern system into the language, where it had not existed in folkloric Tamarian, with stress patterns helping to indicate correspondence between head image roles and tail image roles. Phrase structure and role order no longer needed to match as closely. For the translation portion of the presentation, I decided to exceed the requirements for translation. I prepared not one or two, but 4 separate demonstrations. 3 translating the passage from Twilight in each incarnation of Tamarian, and 1 original passage showcasing how folkloric Tamarian would be taught to children. Eka shivara pi unzi uzani esi elesh kindo. Seso, eka shi eduard, to forks unzi visha shi giza to tejad. Vaisu, keu pe eduard unzi valak, ospalijo nek unzi kishak to tejad. Piso, eka shi eduard to forks, unzi arnok shi mile to tendar, esi kanak netso. The original scheme for need of specificity, mytho-historical Tamarian will be represented by the dialect of the Anba people, who lived on the Orokoth Cape. Eka shivara pi unzi leto in mashek. Seso, Eduard unzi ulo to bival. Vaiso, Eduard shijeva pa eka, unzi karno esiori beo pagongi niva. Piso, eka shi Eduard to forks unzi ama shigula to teshat. The original scheme for the folkloric Tamarian translation was to fabricate an ancient Tamarian community to draw anecdotes from to construct a narrative vocabulary. However, Thanks to the generous contributions of the timekeepers of the Klingon monastery on Boreth, we have been allowed to capture several covert recordings of a Tamarian storyteller named Uba performing for her granddaughter Ziza. From this, Federation scientists were able to gather enough narrative vocabulary to construct a translation matrix with which to translate the passage. Notable individuals which appear in anecdotes referenced in Uba's narrative vocabulary include Kaya, Uba's daughter, and Ziza's mother, Vito, Ziza's father, Ganga, Vito's widowed brother, and Nima, Ganga's late wife. Use of the first person to refer to Bella has been substituted with the third person to better reflect the oral tradition of folkloric Tamarian storytelling and to remove any discrepancies that would have been created by having the character Bella reference Uba's relatives as if they were her own. Bella Shivara Pi Bidi Patama Shivoa Hinak Seso Edward Shijeva Puria Shikita Vegha Vaiso Edward Shijeva Pabela Ganga Shibila Piso Bela Shi Eduard Unzivido Shikaya. The final passage is one of the recordings used to construct the translation matrix. In it, Uba is performing for a much younger Ziza at a time when both Ziza's verbal and narrative vocabularies were much smaller and more personal. As such, here Uba limits her narrative vocabulary to basic idioms, as well as situations which Ziza had personally witnessed. The performance captured by our mixed Klingon and Tamarian survey team showcases an ancient Tamarian creation story. It was recorded in Uba's Story Cave, a cave with wall paintings and a fire pit for shadow puppet shows. Iskaseso. Iskaseso metesh topisa. Kobor kets metesh to velach. Iskaseso topitsa. Ganga tobebil. Iskaseso topisa. Uba shiziza to volka. Tama. Tama tosu paiska sesovava. Vido shishenzila. Iska seso nima lonza tobebil. Tama totusu paiska sesovava. Kaya shiviska shishem hio. Tama shitama totama. Uba shiziza tovolka. Tama shiishka patama. Kaya shiziza. Uba shiketso. Volka vava shiuba. Bidi patama. Ah? Bidi? Oh, Bidi shiwanua ziza shikaya. Ziza shiori gukosh. Thank you to the editors and administrators at Memory Alpha for maintaining comprehensive archives of Star Trek trivia, Star Trek Minutiae for keeping a digital copy of the script for Darmok, and Desmos Graphing Calculator, which I used to create the alphabet. I would also like to thank my dad and my friend Griffin for helping to foster my love of Star Trek. Finally, I would like to thank, strangely enough, Tumblr for mobile user interface for being simultaneously the most unintuitive way of writing a blog post and the most intuitive way of writing this script, which was written entirely in a Tumblr draft. My name is Paco Noack, wishing you uh, damn, I never came up with an image for goodbye.